Good morning and good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us for this webinar on navigating COVID-19 with your tenants with guest David Tilney. I'm going to bring David on in just a minute to talk to you and cover the topic that he's joined us for. But I'm also going to take just a few minutes to tell you a little bit about Advana IRA and what we do with self-directed retirement accounts. So my name is Larissa Green. I've been with Advana IRA for about a little under 9 years now. And before I was in business development, education, and marketing, I actually handled a lot of different aspects of the business, including opening new accounts, transferring money in and out of Advana IRA, helping clients make investments, also paying expenses on behalf of those investments, and receiving contributions, helping with distribution. So I'm very familiar with the business itself. And then transitioning over to education and business development. I do a lot of networking for the company. I teach a lot of classes, anywhere from a 1-hour class all the way through to the 3-hour continuing education classes that we do for business professionals. So that's kind of my background. That's what I do. And I have my contact information here in case you have any questions for me. You can reach me there. I also will put my contact information again at the end of the presentation in case you want to reach out with any questions. So who are we? What do we do? So Advana IRA is considered a third-party administrator for self-directed retirement accounts. We've been doing this for a little over 18 years now. We have 2 offices. We're in the Tampa Bay area of Florida, and then we're also in Atlanta, Georgia, but we can help anybody anywhere. So we have clients nationwide and even worldwide. As long as you have a US-based retirement account, you can self-direct it. What we do for self-direction is a little bit different than what you often hear a brokerage firm call self-directing. So, they might give you the option to choose the stocks, bonds, and mutual funds that you want to invest in, but our definition is a little bit more specific. We don't sell any investments at all, and we actually don't hold anything within the market. So all of the investments that we hold are going to be outside of the market. They're considered private assets. We have around a little over $1 billion under management, and those funds or that value is made up largely of real estate based assets, but there are all different kinds of investments you can make with a self-directed retirement account. I'm going to give you a short list of the things that we see on a regular basis, but that's not by any means the complete list of investments you can make with a self-directed account. We only handle qualified funds, meaning retirement accounts, and there's a few others in there that I'll tell you about in a second. But we don't hold anything that is considered personal cash. So it's only retirement accounts and a few others. What we don't do is provide legal, tax, or investment advice, and that's very important because, as I mentioned, we do a lot of seminars and webinars, and a lot of times what we're talking about there are the rules for self-directing these types of accounts. We talk about the accounts and their benefits, and then, of course, the types of investments that you can make through those accounts, but what we can't do is provide legal, tax, or investment advice. So we'll teach you about the rules, who you can and can't transact with, but if you came to me and asked me whether or not this would be a good investment for your account, I would have to maybe refer you to a professional that could answer that question for you. So our staff is made up of CPAs, attorneys, financial planners, but they don't give that type of advice to our clients because of the conflict there. So, but certainly we have contacts that can help you with those, and I'd be happy to refer you. If you're not sure where your question falls, ask it anyway. And if I can't answer it, I'll just give you that information and I'll help you reach out to somebody that can help you with that. Many people haven't heard of self-directed retirement accounts, just very simply because there's not a lot of administrators out there like Advanta willing to hold these types of accounts in their assets. Probably the biggest reason that we hear, for brokerage firms, for example, is they consider something like real estate or a private mortgage hard to value. They don't want to be responsible for giving advice on those investments. They're not liquid investments, and so they're simply not willing to hold them. And so we sort of fill the gap in the industry. We're really not competing with brokerage firms because we do something completely different than they do. And so we really look at this as the opportunity to truly diversify your portfolio. And so the number of retirement accounts that are truly self-directed only makes up for about 4% or less of all the retirement accounts out there. So many of them are going to be invested in things like mutual funds. And so those that are holding real estate, like our clients, that's less than 4%. I mentioned that I was going to talk about the types of plans, and I just wanted to kind of give you an idea, let you see the slide and the types of plans that we can hold for you, because a lot of times people will say to me, well, I can't self-direct my account because it's not a Roth IRA. And I'm really not sure where that might come from, but I get that a lot. And the truth is, if it ends in IRA, it can be self-directed. And then, of course, there's some other plans out there as well. So just really quickly touching on those plans, traditional or Roth IRA, the employer type of IRA plans like a SEP or a simple. And then, of course, we can also help you with solo 401ks. And we also offer the opportunity to have checkbook control of those accounts, as well as education savings accounts and health savings accounts. I don't see as many education savings accounts as I do HSAs, but definitely they are available. And because the rules for self-directing HSAs and ESAs are exactly the same as IRA accounts, we can hold those as well, and we do. And I see HSAs growing in popularity over the last several years, and there's a few of these accounts that you can still open and contribute to for 2019 as well. So please reach out to me if you have any questions on those. And then I also just want to mention, if you have an old employer plan of any kind, those can be converted to an IRA or rolled over to an IRA and then self-directed. Current employers' plans are a little tricky. It's always going to depend on the administrator of that plan and whether or not the plan allows for you to do an in-service rollover. So if you have questions on that, again, please feel free to reach out to me. My last slide here, I just wanted to show you guys what some of the investments we see in a self-directed IRA look like. So again, this is not the complete list. The IRS just about says that the sky is the limit for alternative investments. They've given us some guidelines on things we can't invest in and people we can't transact with, but then outside of those guidelines, you can make investments, and really it's up to you as to how you want your retirement account to grow. So the two investments that you can't make within an IRA are going to be life insurance and collectibles. And then there are a few people that you can't transact with, and that's going to include what they consider self-dealing or transacting with yourself. And so I teach the rules on another webinar. If you guys are interested, you can search Advana IRA on YouTube or go to advanaira.com and find those videos posted there on the rules for making investments through a self-directed account. But here to just give you a quick idea of the investments we see, again, I mentioned that real estate is the #1 investment class we see, or asset class we see. And so that makes up for about 30% of the assets that we hold. And you can see here it could be commercial or residential, condos, duplexes. It could be long-term or short-term rentals. You can also hold things like mortgages. It could be a first or second mortgage. It could also be an unsecured note, for example. And remembering again that we're not going to give you investment advice. And so if it's an investment that you feel comfortable with, then you could certainly make it through your retirement account. I have some other alternative assets up here. Maybe some of them are considered more unique, but definitely some of it's going to be more commonplace, like private stock, for example, equipment leasing, precious metals, so holding gold and silver bars or coins in your retirement account. All of these things are things that you can do, and many of them we see on a regular basis. So again, if you have any questions on using a self-directed account, how to make contributions, when those deadlines are, and what the rules are, please feel free to reach out to me.
So with that, I'm going to invite David to share information with you on navigating COVID-19 with your tenants. How are you doing today, David?
Great, Larissa. Thanks very much for inviting me.
Thank you so much for joining us for this. And so I shared a little bit about David here on the slide, but you definitely have the opportunity to read more on his bio and find out more about his seminars at davidtilney.com. And I included his contact information there, and it will also be again at the end of the presentation. I will also share the slides from this presentation, so you don't have to try to take down every word on the slides or every word that we say, because we will share the slides with you through email once the presentation is complete. So David, I'm going to just leave it to you, and you can go ahead and take it away. And you know what? I have to also give you control of the keyboard, so I'm going to do that now.
Do I have it yet?
Yes, you do.
I'm trying to move. Okay, very good. Well, good morning or afternoon. My first slide deals with tenant character traits in a perfect world. And really it comes down to most landlords that I talk to over time really think that real estate would be wonderful as long as you never had to deal with tenants and toilets. And so if they look at what they really want in their ideal tenants, they want tenants who are honest, who are responsible, who are stable, who are going to be good stewards of the properties that they rent, who are trustworthy, respectable, and are appreciative that you're renting to them. The key thing that I really want to point out by this slide is every character trait that you want in your tenants, they want in you. And I think landlords miss that a lot. You know, tenants want landlords to be honest. They want landlords to do what they say they'll do in their contracts. They want them to be responsible and take care of the properties that they're renting. In terms of stability, they don't want to have to move into a property today and have it either sold or foreclosed out from underneath them tomorrow. They want the landlords to be good stewards and take care of their properties. Clearly, they want the landlords to be trustworthy and respectful of the tenants and appreciative that the tenants are in their properties, paying them and essentially buying their properties for them over time. I think that's really important. And I think the problem is that you have one or two bad landlords that aren't trustworthy, that don't do what they say they're going to do. And it leaves such a permanent thought in future tenants' mind that landlords are a problem, that you don't have this mode of cooperation. And I really want to try and instill upon you the benefit of trying to change all of that. You know, when it comes to trust, if you want the tenants to trust you, you must first trust them in order for them to trust you. And that's scary at first, but I'm here to tell you that in my business, which, you know, on the prior slide said that I started this in 1978, I can tell you my tenants have done wonderful things for me, and they are trustworthy. They have these tenant traits. You know, if you ask me, have we ever failed and done business with someone that did not have all of these traits? Of course, I'd have to honestly answer yes, but really, I think our tenants are wonderful people. We actually believe that our properties are not our biggest assets. It's our tenants who are our assets. The properties, if you have a vacant property, it does not pay you anything. It eats you alive. There's all kinds of costs involved and all kinds of potential problems. Our properties are in Colorado Springs, and a vacant property in Colorado Springs in the winter, you can have frozen pipes very quickly. In the summer, Colorado Springs is high desert, and so you can lose your yard within a week. And so it's the tenants that pay us. It's the tenants that take care of our properties. We really view our tenants as our on-site resident managers. Let me go to the next slide if I can. There we go, good. Inspire and influence. James Kozels and Barry Posner in the Leadership Challenge had a quote that I really liked a lot. It's, you can't command commitment, you can only inspire it. And I think oftentimes landlords, you know, they look at the legalism of, you signed our lease, you signed our contract, this is what you're required to do. I think you have to do more than that. You really have to, you know, from our standpoint, I spoke to someone yesterday, in fact, and they were talking about the importance for them of having control. And the strange thing in this business is I find I gain more control by giving up control, by trusting my tenants, by giving them some decision-making ability about their properties. It really changes everything upside down, and we really have a much better relationship. You know, you want tenants who feel your house is their home. They're not going to do that if you're doing bed checks on them regularly or constantly going through their house to see how they're doing. We scream like crazy to put the right people in, because what we really think we're doing is we're hiring a tenant to do a job. And the job from our standpoint is, number one, maintain and improve the house and grounds. Number two, pay the rent on time. Number three, get along with the neighbors. Number four, stay forever. And lastly, to use us as a reference when they need us, and when they don't need us, solve problems on their own. During this time of the coronavirus, if you can have that team approach, that we're in this together, that it's almost, I'm trying to think of the right word, well, I can't think right now, but that we are in this together, that it's important to reach out to your tenants and really let them know you care. Personally, I recommend you call each one. It's the touch which is important. 3 or 4 weeks ago, we called over a couple of days each one of our tenants, and we essentially did say, we care. If you have a problem, we have a problem. And we just want you to know we care. And we actually went a little further and said that, we believe in the power of prayer, and if someone really gets sick or has a problem, please let us know. And then we went on and told them some other things, which I've covered further down here. For example, we told them that we'd made a company policy decision that there would be no rent increases this year. That opened up a real sharing between the tenants and us, and we were really able to ask them a lot about their employment situation and their financial situation and their fears and what they had going on in their life. And just being willing to listen to them and empathize with them. And really, if a problem did come up, helping the tenants to solve their problems. They're not your problems, but they are their problems. And if they're not solved, they'll become your problems. We found also that being willing to be somewhat vulnerable and share our own financial concerns and fears that you're having during this time was not a bad thing at all. We are in this together. We are all going through this together. And so anything you can do to get your tenants on the same team and help them to understand that you need them and they need you, and working together, you'll all accomplish more in the process. Now I have a note that mentions care packages, and I just give you a couple of examples of people that I know who have done things which I thought were very, very unique. Ioana Gokan out of California, Southern California, went to Costco one day, and she told me she spent, I think, about $1,800. She has a number of tenants, and she bought a bunch of peanut butter, beans, spaghetti, rice, salsa, bleach, hand sanitizer, and she put together packages that she could deliver to her tenants and put them on their front step and let them know she dropped them off. She didn't have to physically see anyone at the time, but she just offered these, essentially from the tenant standpoint, out of the blue, and it brought tremendous goodwill. It also, the rules of reciprocity say that if you do something nice for folks, they automatically feel that they should reciprocate in some fashion. And I can give you examples all over the world where that happens. From a retail situation, I can remember years ago when we were in Bangkok, Thailand, and you'd walk in a store, and the store that had been essentially dark before you walked in, they'd immediately put on the bright lights, the air conditioning would be on, and the very first thing they do was hand you a Coca-Cola. Well, they were friendly. They did something nice for you. And so it was only fair that you looked at what they had to sell, and there was a greater probability that maybe you might buy something. The same thing happens with tenants. It happens with everyone. If you're nice to someone and do something that's not expected, nice things will come back to you. My son-in-law, John Bunka, he has several rentals, and in talking to his tenants, he discovered, he asked his tenants how they were doing, and they essentially said they were doing fine. But one of his tenants said, we were having a real tough time finding diapers for a child. And John said, what size diapers do you need? And they told him the size, and John happened to have some of those diapers available to him. And so he immediately ran over to their house and dropped off a bag of diapers. That went far. I mean, those things will go real far. And I just, anything you can do to create that rapport. Too often the relationship between landlords and tenants is adversarial and not cooperative. And if you can change that, which means you got to gain the trust. And if you're starting square one right now, it's going to take a little bit of effort. But I will just tell you, it will pay off in spades if you can gain that trust, and you can go back to those character traits that I think that all landlords want, and realize that the tenants want those same things. And so if you can give them that, that would be great. I've got create a GoFundMe account, people helping people. That was an idea that was created by a NARPM groupthink. NARPM stands for the National Association of Residential Property Managers. And yes, it applies more when you're managing properties for owners, but it can also be used with tenants if you have a large number of tenants. Several people created these accounts, and they found owners did contribute it to them for tenants that had an economic problem that they could help solve. But they also found they opened it up to their tenants, and some of their tenants are plenty well heeled and did not have an economic problem, and so they could put into it also. Now, my son-in-law, Kurt Elmas, who master leases enough properties to support his wife and 3 kids, he contacted his owners and asked if any of his owners would be willing to help out any tenants who were having an economic tough time. And he received, I believe, multiple, I don't know the exact number, comments of owners who said, we don't need our rent this month. If someone else needs it, you have our permission to point that in the direction that it's most needed. During times like this, you see some of the best things in people and some of the worst things in people. And I think that if you can really work at how can you help people, because everyone is going to need help getting through this. I heard a podcast not long ago from John Burns Real Estate Consulting. And he is, he's pretty much the top of his game in terms of advising people about the market. And his comments were that it would really take years for properties to return to values that they were in January of this year. He felt that apartment rents would plummet. He felt that, prices will be lower 24 months from now than they are now. Now, is he right? Who the heck knows? But my only point in saying some of this is that we need our tenants. We need people in the properties. Properties are made to be lived in. If they're not there, they cost you tremendously. And I'm sorry to say it, but there will be real estate investors who will be forced out of the game because they're not safe enough in terms of cash flow. And cash flow can change overnight very quickly. I've written down create sticky tenants. And I'd like to give you a story that, I took a class from Ritz-Carlton years ago. And Ritz-Carlton, the hotel group, they're known to really take care of folks who stay in their hotels. And they give authority to any one of their staff to make special decisions to either solve a problem or make a customer stay better. And there was a story that I heard while I took this class that really hit me and impacted the way we run our business. It was a young family with one child who were staying at the Ritz-Carlton for a vacation. And the family gets ready to leave and go home, and in the process, the little kid discovers that his stuffed animal is missing. And all of a sudden, there's this major crisis as to, you know, the hotel turns itself upside down. They can't find the stuffed animal. And so this tearful little kid goes home, and the hotel ultimately discovers that the stuffed animal got wrapped up in the bed sheets, and they found it in the laundry at some later time. But rather than just send the stuffed animal back to the family, which would have been, you know, above and beyond even that, in doing that, they didn't do that. They took the stuffed animal around, and they took it out to the Ritz-Carlton pool and sat it on a chaise lounge and took pictures of it. And then they took it in the dining room of the hotel and took pictures of it sitting at a table with food in front of it. And they took pictures of it all over the hotel in different locations. And then they packed it up and included a handwritten note back to this little kid that said essentially that, you know, your stuffed animals was just not ready to give up on his vacation. Well, it sounds, I mean, it's a cute little story, but the end of the story is really important for landlords to understand. And that is that once that happened, that little kid would not let his parents go to any other place for vacation for, you know, his whole youth. But I mean, the Ritz-Carlton had cemented their relationship with those customers for what they had done. If you can do something with your tenants that can cause those kinds of things to happen, that really can have a big impact long term. Let me see if I can change the slide here. I'm trying. Oh, good. You know, you ought to share resources to help your tenants. Some of your tenants probably run a business. Well, if they run a business, some of the things that can affect you, you know, in terms of the loans, the PPP or the EIDL, make sure they're aware of those things. They probably are. And you know, I didn't put the links right in here, but all you've got to do is type that into into Google, and immediately they'll come up. And you know, if they have payroll, they can get a loan for 250% of their monthly payroll, and if they use it to keep people employed, the loan disappears and they don't have to pay it back over time. And then the EIDL, you can read of those things if you're not familiar, if it doesn't apply to you, but it may help some of your tenants, so you might let them know. Unemployment insurance, clearly you want to suggest to get on unemployment. I have a tenant that does have a problem right now. He's the only one that's surfaced so far. He writes screenplays for Hollywood, and Hollywood is shut down. And so his source of income has totally cut off. Now his wife is a researcher and she works out of the house, and so she has some income coming in, but that income can't cover their whole nut, can't cover all of their financial needs. And so he did come to me and he said that, you know, he was having a problem. He did tell me, this was last month, that he had all the funds in the bank to pay his monthly rent. And since I ACH his rents out of his bank account, I could take it out and it would not have bounced. And so his initial potential solution to his problem was, he said, I'm going to have to ask my dad for a loan for the first time in 30 years. And that was really bothering him. But he wasn't sure his dad could help him, since his dad is a retired physician whose income is coming from the stock market, which has recently had some dramatic decreases. He did contact me a day or two later and indicated that his dad could not help him. And so my response is, do I post no rent for March for you? Do I post some rent for March for you? Or do I post all of the March rent? And he indicated that if for somehow I could possibly give him a temporary accommodation and only post half the rent, that would be wonderful and he would be very thankful. I immediately responded that that was done. But what I really wanted to point out on this unemployment insurance here is he is a 1099 employee. He does not work for any one individual. He is an independent contractor. So a couple of days later, I gave him some some resources that could help him, and one being that he could apply, being an independent contractor, for unemployment insurance. And he was very, very touched that I called him up and we had a nice discussion regarding that. There are other social agencies, churches you might know about. One of the sites which might be helpful to you that you might want to write down is a site called findhelp.org. And you go to that site and you put in a zip code anywhere in the country, and it brings up a whole bunch of different resources, be it sources for money, be it sources for food, any number of different things. And do I know people that have used those resources successfully? No, I don't. But I think the more places that we are aware of that might be able to help people that we do business with, it's something to really think about and pass on to them.
And David, before you go on, I did have a couple of questions pop up here. And I'm going to try something because I'm getting a little bit of feedback. I'm going to mute you just while I read the question, and then I'm going to unmute you. Okay, so the question I have here is, a tenant has paid half of their rent for April and has been waiting for their unemployment to come. He told us he got his unemployment this week, but keeps stalling on paying the balance. What would you suggest? Go ahead.
Well, my tenant, when I did charge him half a month's rent, he said, as soon as my funds come in from the government, meaning the $1,200 times 2 plus whatever it was for his child, I think it was $500, those funds would be earmarked for me. And my response to him was, don't be so quick to act. I think this is going to be a big deal and longer term. And I think you need to hold on to that for the moment. So do I have an immediate solution for payment for this month and subsequent months? No, I don't. I think it's too early to have those answers. What I was going to say is this individual did contact me again, and my rent is due a week from today, and I will ACH it from all of my tenants. And, from this tenant standpoint, here's a guy who's honest, who's been with me for a long time, who's done everything he said he would do. He has the character traits that I initially pointed out: honest, responsible, stable, good steward of the asset, trustworthy, respectful, appreciative. Yeah, I'd really like to have the funds, but do I want him to move right now when there aren't too many people that aren't hunkered down that want to explore other housing right now? I need someone in there maintaining my house. I need someone paying the utilities, taking care of the yard. The best advice I can do is say, communicate with the tenants, see if you can get a hold of them. If they're afraid to talk to you, that tells me that they don't trust you at this point. They think that, only bad things are going to come from the conversation. I think our job right now is to say, I know you're stressed. My job is to reduce that stress to the best of my ability. I don't know if that helps or not. I don't have a simple answer as to how to get paid. This tenant needs me to only charge half a month's rent for May, next Thursday. And I, he said he was going to call me. This is interesting. I'll just share this with you. He asked me that in an email. And I didn't respond because he said he was going to give me a call, and he did not call. And so I called and got a voicemail, and I said, I really need to talk to you. And then I responded the next morning with an email, or maybe it was vice versa, and he did call. And I said, yes, I'm certainly willing to grant you another temporary accommodation. And I've got something on a slide a little further down. I think it's the next slide that we'll talk about that in a minute. But I said, I need communication. And I, just like you, I'm as concerned as you are about this. I said, this happens to be the last month of our corporate year. And right now we have about a $4,000 loss for the year. Now, am I hurting financially? No, I'm not. But my corporation is going to take a loss for this year. Our year ends the end of April. And it was, if you have something that's a problem for you, share that. Let people know you're a human being. We all have the same problems, but let them know. I said, from my standpoint, I said, I'm 69 years old. I'm in of a different generation than you are. My first choice is to be eyeball to eyeball, belly to belly, and talking with you. We can't do that now. So my second choice is to have a phone call to at least be able to discuss this a little bit. The least way that I like to communicate is with text. And obviously, sometimes we do use text and we do use emails. Landlords today, I find oftentimes, at least professional property managers, are trying to make everything so remote that they don't have this personal touch with their tenants. Showings are done by the individuals themselves, in other words, self-showings. Applications are done online. Contracts are signed online. And if managers had their choice, they'd love to never meet the tenant the entire time they do business with them. I think they're not going to be successful in getting people to go above and beyond and do the very best they can to pay their rent, to borrow from great Aunt Tilly if they need to call their parents, to figure out solutions. You need to be able to talk to people. And so I would recommend that the owner talk to the individual, do whatever it takes to have that conversation. And don't go in with a preconceived notion that, our contract says you must pay. If you don't pay, you're getting a 3-day notice. And as soon as the court's open, you're out of here. And if you don't pay, it goes on your record and no one's going to want to rent to you again. My next slide, I think, kind of covers some of this. So let me flip on that if I can. Yeah.
I got it, David.
Be flexible. I may have already mentioned, but if you're going to consider a rent increase moratorium for 2020, by all means, make sure you tell your tenants that. Remember, your goal is long-term occupancy. You don't want turnover. You want to survive the people right now that are going through economic hardship if they're good folks. If they're not good folks, okay, you have to take remedial action on them. But if you've got someone that have the character traits that we first listed, then you got to think real long and hard before you immediately serve them notice that they're going to have to move and you start the process. And just remember, you can't start the process very quickly now anyway. The courts are essentially closed. You're not going to get into them for some period of time. Let's see, COVID-19 temporary accommodations. On the individual that I mentioned, and I only have that one person. I have one other person that concerns me, but they're not concerned. They think they're in great shape, and I'll share that with you in a second. But on the individual that I did make temporary accommodations, meaning a half month's rent payment for April and a half month's rent payment for May, was that a gift? Was it a rent payment restructure? I don't really know at this point. I think we'll have to see. We'll have to see what the market does. The market's going to set the rents. And if we have a worldwide depression, might you have to reduce your rents? You certainly might. Now, I've heard numbers that we could have unemployment as high as 30%. My understanding was during the depression, it was only 25%. So clearly you're going to at least have 70% of people that have income streams. But you're going to have to look at what the market requires for you to find good people to put in your house. The one recommendation I would strongly give you if you make some kind of a temporary accommodation is don't take a note in lieu of the rent payment. Now, why do I say that? If you take a note for payment of rent, it's deemed the rent was paid. It's done, finished. Now your only option is to sue on the note. And to sue on an unsecured note from someone that doesn't have any money, that's a potential problem. So, don't take a note for it. You can certainly restructure the rents but to me, it makes sense to restructure the rents based on realistic ideas of where future incomes will come from. If right now there's a holding pattern and there's no indication of where the income's coming from, pretty hard to set a restructure right now. Let me share with you the other tenant that I mentioned, that because I think April for single family houses, there were really by and large single family houses, most rents were paid in April. And multifamily, my understanding is 30% were either not paid or partially paid. I think May is going to be worse than April. I think June will be worse than May. I think unemployment is going up, and people that don't realize they have a problem will discover that they have a problem. At some point in time, I hope, and I certainly don't have the answers, but I hope at some point government stops printing money, because obviously that's not a long-term solution that works very well all either. But the other individual that I have is someone who works for Comcast Commercial. And so when I talked to him about his financial situation, he said, "Oh no, I'm in good shape." And I said, "Well, I thought you'd be in good shape because everyone now is working out of their homes and they all need internet." And he said, "Yeah, but that's Comcast residential. I'm in Comcast Commercial, and quite honestly, all the commercial guys are canceling appointments right now, and we're not getting any sales." Well, how long? So then my next question was, well, are you salary or are you commission? And his indication was that, well, he's 70% commission and 30% salary. So I was very fearful that pretty soon he would be out of work. And so I called him again. I mean, he paid April's rent fine. And I contacted him again recently to make sure there were no further problems, because I don't want to ACH money out of someone's account only to have it bounce later. That doesn't help either one of us. I'd much rather know in advance. And I'd much rather be able to empathize with them and see if we can figure out solutions. Does he have other family members that can move in with him? What are the possibilities? So we have to kind of look at that. Well, he said that no, Comcast was taking very good care of him at this point. And in fact, they were paying him what his base and his commissions would be if he was able to sell commercial, accounts. The last thing on this slide has to do with standardizing accommodation request procedures. That's really important. It doesn't mean you can't look to each individual's situation separately. I wouldn't go around sending out a blanket email saying, if anyone doesn't have the ability to pay rents, you don't have to pay rents. That would be ridiculous. Although we are seeing all kinds of messages like that posted on the internet, and we've got some of our state and even federal legislatures that are looking at putting a laws into place that say no rents will be due at all from tenants until this coronavirus is over. Pretty scary to see some of those things. If you haven't seen them, look at them. There's, well, AOC has one right now that looks pretty scary, I think. But the point I really wanted to make on the standardization of the request procedures is fair housing. Create a form or go on the internet and find a form that makes people fill out their situation, that they are unemployed, and you can have them prove that they're unemployed or their situation, but have that. Don't just take it for granted. Now, I did take it for granted with my specific tenants, but I know my tenants. I have a long-term relationship with them. And if I have a tenant that tells me they don't have an income stream, and I've got their original applications, I've got every application, saved for the last 20 years. And so I know what this guy does. And I know that people aren't doing films right now. So I know he does have that problem. Uh, but this whole slide really just has to do with be flexible. Don't go into it that my way or the highway. This is what our contract says. This is what you have to do. If you do that, I think you may end up with some empty houses and still no payments. And the cost to turn over a property can be great. My longest tenant was with me for just under 25 years. My next longest one, 18 years. Your objective is to keep people in their properties. And I also have a history, just to share this with you, that there was a previous crisis that one of my tenants had. He happened to be in the dentless automobile repair business, where you use suction cups to take hail damage out of vehicles. And there was a tremendous hailstorm in Europe, and he went over to the Netherlands, and he earned, I think it was like 150,000 euros in a relatively short term solving problems. Well, what he didn't know is the company he worked for another company, and somewhere up the chain, there had been fraud. And so he didn't get paid. And he came back, and all of a sudden, this tenant who'd been with me for a long time didn't have the ability to pay me. And so we worked together, and initially he went to his church and got some money to pay the rent. And then he got a nighttime job at Home Depot restocking shelves at night that helped. But bottom line is he was behind on the rent 2 or 3 months. And I'll share with you that finally I said to him, I've got to start the meter running. I can't let you stay here forever. And so I have to serve you a 3-day notice. And at that point I was in Florida and the property was in Colorado Springs. So I said, my daughter will have to bring it over to you. And just so you can understand the character traits of my tenants, his response is, just tell me where she is and I'll go pick it up. And that's what you want. You want that cooperation, not competition. And I will tell you that he did work it out. We did square it away. He did get all caught up. And that's really what you want to have happen long term. So again, my comment would be as flexible as possible. I'm going to go to the next slide if I can turn it. I don't think.
Yeah, and I had some more questions pop up too, David, if you have a second.
Sure.
Okay. So this first one is, a tenant's lease expires at the end of May in Georgia and we don't want to renew. A letter is being sent to the tenant. What if they make excuses not to move? Go ahead.
Well, that's a tough question. This next slide deals with, you got to know the federal and state laws. And really, you do need to know Georgia's law. A lot of states are now saying tenants don't have to move during the COVID virus. And they're saying that, you have to show just cause, meaning they violated something in the lease. Even if you have a lease that goes from point A to point, time A until time B, and you've told them you're not renewing, that you have a potential problem. I would get back to communication. I would ask them what their plans are. And the nice thing about owning real estate and having tenants versus having your income come in from notes is you can go to a tenant and say, where's mom and dad live? How can I help you solve your problem? Do I need to have a truck here tomorrow? Explain if it's not because of that they violated something on the lease, and you can tell them why you can't renew it. You want to take the property off the market and you want to rehab it, or maybe you want to move into. I don't know your situation. I don't have enough information, but I do think communication is really the key. And rather than just send paperwork, I talk to them about their needs and their situation and how can you help them solve their problem. You may not be able to get them out. Knowing the laws are absolutely critical. And some of the states, you know, they've made it better, I think, to be a tenant than to be a landowner. For example, I don't know if there's anyone on this call from California, but their recent laws that took place last year said that if you have a tenant that's either on a month-to-month contract or on a lease, but they've been in the property for a 12-month period of time, and the property is a rental property and is going to be continued to be a rental property, then they have the right to renew no matter what, unless you can show just cause that they have to move out. And furthermore, their rent increase is limited to, and I may have the numbers wrong because I don't have it right in front of me right now, but I think it's 3% plus the CPI for their locale. Well, think about this for a minute. You as a property owners don't have your expenses limited to something. And so here these people can stay there forever and you can't terminate. And if you want to do a major rehab or you want to move into the property, then in this particular law's case, you've got to give your tenant 60 days advance notice. And within 15 days of that notice, you have to write them a check equal to 1 month's rent payment to assist them in moving. It's a big deal. I would rather, in that case, be involved in master leasing and master lease something and sublease it, take a spread, because I, as a tenant, would be able to renew my lease forever without taking on some of the risks of ownership. So back to your question, I don't have the answer, but I think the best you can do is to communicate and see if you can work things out on a human level rather than just a here's the law, here's what we're doing situation. I don't know if that helps. If you want to ask a little further or give us more information, feel free. On this slide, okay,
I had another question for you, David. This one that popped up, they're asking, what about scenarios where tenants are not acting in an appropriate manner, i.e. claiming difficulties when there is none? As you mentioned, these times bring out the worst in people as well. How do you make sure you're not getting taken advantage of? Go ahead.
Well, I think the answer to that is, you know, you should have standardized accommodation request procedures that you really can verify. You know, trust, but trust and verify. Verify that their request is legit. And if it's not legit, then you have to take legal action if nothing else works, or you have to buy them out of the property one way or the other. You got to get them to leave. My problem with taking legal action is, you know, the courts aren't open right now. And I think there's going to be a tremendous backlog. And I think it's going to take you a long time, and they're going to be able to squat there for a lot. They can cause you a lot of damage. So I think you want to find out, trust and verify what the situation is. If it does bring out the worst, the first thing I would say is, whose fault is that? Who put that tenant in there? Is it their fault or yours? You hired the wrong guy. You either weren't able to determine their moral code. You didn't share your expectations. They didn't have the right skill set. Something was wrong. So at least you need to understand that you're taking a seminar and getting through this, and you need to get better the next time in putting the right tenant in your property that does have those character traits that you want. That's about the best I can offer on that, I think.
Thanks, David.
And is there another question, or should I continue?
Continue, go ahead.
Great. So I've listed Harry Heist's site. He's an attorney in Florida. He's got the site, a great site, great name. You won't forget it, evict.com. And Harry represents landlords. But the good thing about his site is he's got a whole bunch of videos on there, helpful videos that don't cost you anything to see, that give you good ideas. He also has a whole series of forms. Whether the forms are available to you if you're not a client of his, I'm not really sure. Now, if you're not calling in from the state of Florida, so what? He's still got great ideas for you. I receive information from a number of attorney sites, and my properties are all in Colorado, but they all give me great ideas as to how to handle certain situations. So I really recommend, if you're not familiar with Harry Heist, and I think he also has has a bunch of videos on Vimeo. I didn't put a site because I'm not sure, but he does do podcasts, and he really knows what he's talking about. So he's someone that you might want to plug into. I already mentioned that you really need to Google federal and state landlord-tenant laws, and really any law that will affect you. You know, it may not just be landlord-tenant. It may be licensing law, real estate licensing law. You've got to really comply with all the temporary eviction laws. And I'm sorry to tell you in Georgia, but if Georgia says you can't evict someone now during the COVID-19 virus, unless they show cause, then you're going to have to show cause. And then I'm sorry, but you probably can't get to court right away. So you might start the process, if you're allowed to start the process, and then open up discussion and see if through discussion you can, kind of mitigate some of the damages, both to you and the tenant. And the tenant needs to know that if you evict them, then that goes on their record. And in this day and age, they may have a very difficult time being able to rent another property down the road. So it's very definitely in the tenant's best interest and your best interest to come to terms without having to go through the courts. I went through the courts one time in 1981, and it happened to be evicting a urologist out of a high-end house. And it wasn't for non-payment of rent. It was because he was wasting the asset. He had too much money. He didn't respect any of his stuff, and he didn't respect any of our stuff. And when I took him to court, I had a letter from the Homeowners Association. I had a neighbor. I had the owner who I represented. And we swatted flies with a sledgehammer. But I will tell you, his kids were on the roof the night we threw him in the street, ripping off shake shingles from the roof and burning them in the driveway. That was their attitude. They just didn't care. And so, sometimes you have to do that. I did that experience one time. It gave me a headache. Took me a lot of time. I didn't enjoy it. And I decided that I would never go to court again if I didn't have to. And I think as landlords, you ought to realize that going to court doesn't make you money. So if there's any other way you can solve the problem, I would definitely do it. The last slide that I've got here is really about your personal situation. Oh, I see where I should have clicked. I'm sorry.
Oh, that's okay.
It really says, get safe as best you can. And to me, that means increased cash flow. And why do I say cash flow? Because many people say, well, equity is really important. Well, I can remember back, I knew someone personally who was home free at age 35. And he was in the commercial business. He had all these wonderful commercial buildings that he built, and he didn't have any loans on them greater than 50% loan to value. But when the RTC came in and closed down the savings and loan, and he could not fill his buildings, he lost every single building he had, and he had to start over again. Remember, if there's a lot of equity in the properties, the lenders don't mind taking it. If there's no equity in the property, they're more inclined to work things out with you. The thing that helps you the most, in my opinion, going through a really tough time is cash flow. So anything you can do to build your cash flow is just really, really important. I'd say get rid of any unnecessary expenses and overhead. And for some of you, that may mean that you find ways to do things without some of your employees now. And maybe you've used the PPP to fund employees, and maybe that's worked for you, but just think about that, because there are ways of doing things more efficiently without a whole bunch of overhead. A lot of us have found that, we already were working out of our homes, but I think most people have found they can do that now. Renegotiate private financing. I ran a mortgage company for a guy who moved to Hong Kong, and I found in the note business that when interest rates dropped through the floor, people would call up and say, if you won't renegotiate the interest rate, we're going to refinance with someone else and pay you off. I think you ought to talk to private lenders if you have private lenders. If things got real tough, they'd say, we'll put the keys in the mailbox. It takes a lot longer to go through a foreclosure than it does an eviction. It takes longer to get someone out of ownership than it does out of a rental. and yet both just produce income from a piece of real estate. Refinance any mortgages if you can to reduce loan constants. Loan constants are high when you're paying off tremendous amount of principals as compared to the interest. If you're at the end of the loan, and you can re-amortize those loans if you can refinance them, and oftentimes reduce your payments dramatically. You also ought to consider, if you have a bunch of properties, you might want to consider selling some of it, paying the darn taxes, taking the cash, and paying off debt on some of the other properties. Now, if Peter Fortunato's on the line, he ought to close his ears. But I think you got to look at survival first, and if that is a way to survive and keep some things rather than lose all, my recommendation is to don't remove it from the equation. At least consider it. That's really the end of my slides. Were there any other questions or comments?
Yeah, a couple of questions did pop up, and I just want to remind everybody we have a few more minutes. We can take a few more questions. Just type them into the question box. David, a question that popped up here is, would you consider bartering for rent, letting tenant do work on or off the property, take liens on their vehicles, etc.?
Yeah, well, first of all, I would say that my tenants generally do maintain their own properties to a large degree. When they don't have the skill set, then they use the vendors that we have, and they're responsible for the first X number of dollars of those repairs. But our tenants, by and large, are blue collar. And as blue collar tenants, they have skill sets. And so certainly, I don't pay tenants ever for doing something in their properties, because they're not doing it for me, they're doing it for them. Might I reimburse for materials? Yes, but I won't pay them to work in their own properties. It comes down to a potential problem of them falling off a ladder or causing some problem, and all of a sudden I have a heck of a time from an insurance standpoint. And so I don't do that. Will I use existing tenants to do work in other properties? Yes, if their moral code is right, if they fill out my independent contractor agreement that essentially says, yes, they have their own tools, they do their own hours, they work for me, a minimum of their source of income, they work for multiple people, they agree to hold themselves liable. They either have workman's comp, which they give me that workman's comp information, or they don't, but they notarize my statement, essentially saying that if they cut off their arm, they know that's their problem. And have I done business with the tenants on that in that regard? Many times. That our tenants have the skill sets we need. You think about the guy who installs tile or will redo a shower. Those guys are all independent contractors. They don't work for the tile company, generally speaking, and they can't afford workman's comp insurance, so they don't have it anyway. So you're not really taking a risk that you're not taking in the normal cost of doing business anyway. If you have workman's comp that will cover them, great. But if you don't, make sure you get them to sign off and dot their I's and cross their T's, that they understand they're an independent contractor. And I get it notarized. We want them to stand up and raise their right hand and repeat after me, I promise that I am an independent contractor. And oftentimes we will actually set them up as an LLC, since in Colorado it doesn't cost us more than $50, and it just makes them look more like a business than doing business with John Q. Tenant.
Okay. I had another question pop up here. She wants to know, would you take a security deposit for the last month's rent, or excuse me, for the rent if the tenant allows?
Well, certainly some landlords are doing that. I can't do that because in the way we do business, we don't have any security deposits. We do use money as an economic qualifier. More money is better than less money when people are moving in, and I want them to have skin in the game. But we, find security deposits only take you to court, and I don't see any benefit of a landlord ever going to court. So we sell all of our occupants a rental increase limitation, a first right of refusal option to renew their rental contract with a limited rent increase. And then we pay a performance bonus when people move out based on what they've done while they're there to maintain the property and pay the rent on time, and how they've helped us rent the property when they move. We tend to go in over 90% of the time from a tenant to a tenant with zero downtime. And that's very important to me, because, you know, if you have to take your property off the market and to have make ready time of a day or two, and people move out on the last day of the month, and people who are moving in want to move in on the first day of the month, you may lose a month's rent. And I can't afford to do that, and I can't afford to have a vacant house. That would be, if you turn over your properties once a year, that would be 8% of lost rents. So I can't do that. Do I know people that do take security deposits in lieu of rent, convert it? I would get it in writing that the tenant is allowing you to do that. You run the risk, of course, that once that happens, there's no security deposit for when they move out. That's the only comment I would make.
Okay, and I have one last question here. Thank you, everybody, for putting your questions up for us. One option to resolve this situation with securing tenants may be a rent lock for 2 years at today's rental prices. Would you consider that?
Absolutely, with the right guy, I would. Yeah, I mean, it depends. I don't think I'll have to do that. Now, when you say for 2 years, our contracts are actually month-to-month contracts, but what we agree to do is hold the rents constant for a period of time. So all of our contracts end either the last day of June or the last day of July, and they get a new contract, which is a month-to-month contract that goes through that following time period. And we'll set that rent for that period of time. Would I consider doing locking up the rent for 2 years? Yeah, I mean, we're in the big unknown. I don't have a clue what's going on. And I just, would I do that? I'd do it in a flash. For the right tenant, sure.
Okay, all right, that's a great answer. Well, with that, I just want to thank David. Thank you so much for joining us for this webinar. I really appreciate it. I know everybody that's logged on really appreciates the information. I got a lot of comments thanking you for everything that you shared. I know we're going to have a lot of people listening to the replay. So thank you again for that. As I mentioned, the webinar is recorded. Everybody that registered will get the link to listen back, as well as a copy of the slides. So you'll have that information available to you. And you can check out more on David Tilney at his website, davidtilney.com. He does do landlord seminars. We're unfortunately at a point where he did have to cancel the one for May. So, but I'm sure that information, once decided upon, will be posted on your website. Is that correct, David?
Yes, and we are kind of whispering about the possibility of maybe doing a virtual seminar. I shouldn't open my mouth because there's no actual plans at this point. But yes, if we decide to do a seminar down the road, we'll certainly post it on the website.
Okay, great. And so with that being said, I want to thank everybody again, and everybody will get the link to listen again. Thank you so much. Everybody have a great day. Thank you, David.
Thank you, Larissa.